Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to another episode of Culture Feeds. I am your host, Yaparoni. Thanks so much for joining me today. And this week, I wanted to talk about Euphoria. I have been thinking a lot about Euphoria, especially after the official series slash season finale has come out. I thought this would be a great way to sort of look back on all the great things that Euphoria has brought, because I do think this is like a super important show to my generation, and I've been following this show along for a very long time. I think the first time I watched Euphoria was like the summer after the first season came out. I feel like I was really able to see sort of like the evolution of the show, or maybe de-evolution, if we want to call it that. This episode is going to focus on a lot of like the context around Euphoria. I'm not really going to be dissecting specific scenes or episodes or anything of the sort, but just kind of overall what I feel like Euphoria represented culturally, as well as just certain logistical things that ended up happening throughout the show, real life events, and what we can take from the show now that it's gone. Or not that it's gone, that it's over. But it does kind of feel like the show is gone, and I feel like the show has been gone for a really long time in the eyes of a lot of people, because the show essentially became something totally different than we ever thought it would be. There's just a lot of things to look back on, because I think Euphoria was really set up to be a generation defining show. I think a lot of people see a lot of parallels to maybe Degrassi or Skins, and that was kind of like the shows that define like the millennial generation, and Gen Z kind of had a version of that through Euphoria. I would also say that I think it just makes me sad to say that Euphoria was set up to be a generation defining show, and then it kind of devolved into something that I wouldn't want to call it that. I wouldn't want to say that it defines our generation, especially with the way it ended up panning out. But I also think that in and of itself is representative of sort of how the hope within Gen Z sort of started to deteriorate, and we started to see it sort of being taken away from us in the past couple of years. I don't know if that sounds like too edgy or like, I don't know. But I have a lot of things to say about this show, so I'm excited to get into it. So I kind of want to start from the beginning with Euphoria Season 1. Now, if you are not familiar with these photos, you are not the only one, because I actually found these photos while doing research for this episode. So Petra Collins was the original kind of art director, I believe, of the show Euphoria before it was like set to start filming and things like that, and she had done a bunch of these these concept photo shoots with the cast of Euphoria. I have never seen these photos before, and I think they're absolutely beautiful. I think they're very experimental, and you can clearly see like the art direction that the show first was going in was obviously created by Petra Collins. And if you don't know, Petra Collins was sort of booted off of the creation of the show, or like the actual making of the show, because HBO thought that she was too young or something. And then she had talked about in this interview, I believe, that she just thought, you know what, like, I guess the opportunity didn't like really work out, and that was it. But she didn't realize that they essentially ripped everything off based off of her work. And that's really disappointing to hear. Especially that happening to like a young female artist. And clearly she had such an influence into how this show was cinematically and aesthetically created. It almost shows that like the foundations of creating this show was already sort of broken or corrupted in a way, because they were taking the ideas of another artist that was no longer involved in the project. And I feel like you can see throughout the show, this aesthetic is slowly deteriorating as the series goes on, given that she's no longer part of the project and there's nothing to really like rip off of anymore. I feel like it symbolizes sort of this deterioration of cohesiveness when it came to the show, and you see it like all the way to the very end. I honestly think like when it comes to the main appeal and selling point of Euphoria was the aesthetic, and I think it's pretty safe to say that I don't think Sam Levinson really had any involvement in that, even though he was obviously the one that hired Petra Collins. But when it comes to the art direction itself, it's clear that she was the one that like created all this. I think I can't believe these images aren't like more viral, I guess, or like more sought out, because this concept is just so beautiful. I didn't know about this when I was researching. I found it on Reddit, and this is just absolutely gorgeous. And I feel like, honestly, this is like the most interesting thing that Sydney Sweeney has ever done. Just like her in this photo shoot is like so crazy. But I also think something that was also really gravitational in the show was the ensemble cast. Like, I would honestly say the show really started with like a extremely strong ensemble cast, and there's a reason why so many of the actresses and actors on this show ended up becoming extremely successful afterwards. I think they all brought something really unique to the table, and I think the main appeal with the ensemble cast is that they all had such distinct characters on the show and character arcs, and we got to see their stories and the context that built around these characters. We build worlds for them. The way each episode started with like an introduction to each character and their background, like it made you feel something and made you feel attached to each character in a different way. And I think they just did that so well in the beginning of the show. And that's also something that they kind of strayed away from later on. In season 3, the main background, like introduction arcs that we got in the season were Ollie and Alamo. So that was kind of lost, even though we consistently kept getting new characters and stuff. I've actually rewatched the first season of Euphoria quite a few times, and every single time I think I have a different opinion of it. I think I feel differently towards the show every time I rewatch it. And I also think it depends on the stage of life that I'm personally in. I thought this was like the most groundbreaking show ever when I first watched it, but I was also a freshman in college, and I thought there was no show that like truly encapsulated like the Gen Z experience the way that this show did. And learning the context of how this show was created, given that Petra Collins was a lot younger, she was able to encapsulate like this younger generation like aura with the art direction of this show. Collins moved to Los Angeles in 2019 to work on the HBO series Euphoria. Collins stated that Levinson told her, "I wrote a show based on your photos. Will you direct it?" She was supposed to direct, but then she was dismissed for being too young. But she basically spent 5 months developing the entire show, including casting the characters. She was 25 to 26 when she was first hired to be involved in Euphoria, but I feel like she was able to capture like this youthful atmosphere that like really defined the thematic elements of this show. And every time I've rewatched the first season, it kind of just makes me sadder and sadder. Like I don't want to rewatch the first season anymore as much as I used to, because it just makes me sad now, especially knowing how the show ends and like the things that happened. And given that I was somewhat of an earlier watcher, like I started watching when only the first season was out, and we just see all these things happening in real time. I think it's also, like I said earlier, a reflection of the hope that my generation still sort of had around this time, like 2018, 2019. And then it all just goes downhill from there, and you literally see it happening on the show. I would even say that the cinematography and creative direction of Euphoria's first season kind of set up the aesthetic and the trends that we see in the next 2 to 5 years post the first season of Euphoria. So I feel like this entire aesthetic, the makeup and the visual lighting and just the aesthetic of everything, it continued to have like a lasting cultural impact. I feel like we still see a lot of remnants of what this aesthetic continued to influence later on. I really do think that this aesthetic defined like a very pivotal time for Gen Z. So now I would say that season 2 is sort of when things were seeming to go downhill and certain storylines were being adjusted during the production and filming process. There were also rumors about like conflicts happening behind the scenes. So there were rumors at the time when season 2 was airing that there were some conflicts happening between like Zendaya and Hunter Schafer and Jacob Elordi. Not between Zendaya and Hunter Schafer, but they had a problem with Jacob Elordi where they didn't want to be like filming scenes with him allegedly. These were all rumors, they were never confirmed, but just the way that Sam Levinson chose to completely abandon the storyline between Jules and Nate, I feel like that was like such a central plot in the first season where they just like kind of don't even touch on it at all in the second season until I think the tape with Nate's dad and Jules. Nate returns back to Jules, but that's kind of the only time we ever see them like interacting with each other again. And even in the third season we don't really see them interacting, which I would say makes more sense because they're grown up in the third season, but still, just like that entire abandonment of that storyline did feel odd to us. And then there was also issues that were confirmed between Sam Levinson and Barbie Ferreira. Barbie Ferreira didn't love like the route her character was going in, and I thought it was such a shame as well that she was not involved in season 3. Maybe not a shame necessarily, it's kind of maybe a blessing and a curse, because she was the original like cam girl in the show, and then the entire third season is like centered around sex work and all this. Like those themes were already kind of sprinkled into the show because of her character, but then they like completely pivoted in season 3 and she's not really there. And I feel like seeing her storyline integrated in that I don't know if Sam Levinson would have been able to execute it well, but it would have been interesting. So again, we didn't really get any like confirmation about like what the vibe was like between the cast during season 2 or anything like that. But I do think just seeing how cast dynamics have changed in real life over the years, I don't think it's a crazy assumption to say that it could have affected the show itself. And I think I really don't love that sometimes when like real life issues start to bleed into the quality of the show that they work on. And I feel like there has to be a very specific type of person on set to make sure everyone like checks themselves and stuff like that. And I just don't think Sam Levinson was probably the right person to do that. The last time I rewatched this, the last 2 seasons were, I would say, a couple months before the third season came out. I rewatched the first season multiple times. I never rewatched season 2 because I was just like, the plot just like started to not fucking make any sense. So I was just like, I don't like how this ended. I never felt inclined to rewatch it, but I did rewatch it knowing that season 3 was going to come out. But interestingly enough, this last rewatch that I didn't really love season 1 as much as I remember loving it. I feel like as the rewatches progress, like I like continue to like it a little less. But with season 2, I feel like there was a level of appreciation that I had for it rewatching it. Of course, like towards the latter half of the second season, I was kind of like, yeah, we're starting to lose the plot here a little bit. I don't really know what's going on. But the first couple episodes, amazing. Episode 5 of season 2, you like Zendaya's best work. It's a conflicting season. I feel like season 2 just feels like everyone's kind of coming out ahead, you know, but it's kind of unresolved in a lot of unsatisfying ways. And obviously, just like even looking at these 2 slides and how differently they look cinematically, you can kind of see that like the Petra Collins influence was starting to run out of it basically, so they had to start doing new things. Apparently they shot this season on film, which I thought was an interesting cinematic choice, and they also continued to do that in season 3. I absolutely loved the storyline with Fezco and Lexi. I thought they were such an unexpected yet chemistry exploding storyline, and of course, we're going to talk about Angus Cloud real soon, but I do think that them adding Fezco into Lexi's storyline really could have developed her character in a new way, in which we don't see that happening in season 3, because obviously Fezco is not really part of the storyline as much anymore because of Angus Cloud's untimely death. It still breaks my heart to this day that he didn't get to go see her play. It just makes me so sad. I remember when this season was coming out, a lot of people were a little bit like, iffy on the storyline between Nate and Cassie. I also think like Cassie was one of the most complex characters. She was just kind of muddied into this like vapid girl who is just constantly seeking approval from the male gaze and things like that, when I think she's much deeper than that, especially with her storyline with McKay. It was interesting that he was only in the first episode of season 2, and then he just like never came back again. That was also kind of weird, but also I guess it kind of makes sense because he's in college now and he's not with Cassie anymore. And then we also get introduced to Dominic Fike's character, Elliot, and he's kind of in like this weird entanglement with Rue and Jules, their relationship. Oh my god, I just realized that I did not add the 2 special episodes into my research for this episode, because those are actually like some of my most favorite pieces of the Euphoria universe, is Rue and Jules's special episodes. I guess I can talk about it now. Those episodes were released during COVID, before they started filming season 2, I believe. I feel like they set up a really good foundation into understanding the complexities of Rue and Jules's relationship dynamic. You kind of get a better understanding of like why their relationship is more complicated. And then Elliot just kind of comes in and fucks it all up. And I'm a little confused as to what the intention really was bringing Elliot into the show, only for him to be in the second season. It just felt a little... He was so insignificant to actually like progressing the show forward that I could imagine the second season without him. Even though I do love Dominic Fike, I think he was more of like a buffer, given that they didn't explore Jules's relationship to Nate to show how Jules is sort of unlearning or dismantling this idea of femininity in relation to men. But we never see him again after he does that long ass song for Rue. He did also feel a little bit reductive in terms of actually developing Rue and Jules's relationship arc. Not necessarily saying that I feel like they should have been together and like Elliot was in the way of that. Like, I feel like that's kind of a childish analysis. But I don't know, I just feel like he didn't really bring much to the second season, in my opinion. So now I want to kind of talk about the timeline in real life between seasons 2 and 3. There are 2 main things that completely changed like the trajectory of the show, according to Sam Levinson, which is the death of Angus Cloud and the 2023 writer's strike. So Sam Levinson has said that essentially these 2 events had created circumstances where he had to basically scrap the entire 3rd season that he was originally writing. Hunter Schafer has also talked on the Call Her Daddy podcast back in 2024, I believe, and she talked about how Angus's death like completely changed everyone's perspective on how to navigate the show moving forward. So I want to show a little bit of that.
Here's the real tea, is that a lot has happened, but at least for me, and knowing where the rest of the cast is at and everything, a lot has happened. We have had, and it's hard to talk about, but, we've had deaths. Girl, getting emotional. I think everyone feels a certain sense of anticipation for, like, if we are supposed to do this season 3 of, like, obviously, I'm still coming to qualms with what's happened, and losing people that we really loved and were a part of this family and everything, and I think if we do go back, that's gonna be tough. I mean, and I think there's a world in which we can channel that into making it a beautiful season 3 if it is supposed to happen. But I think, that shit really threw everyone for a loop. So on an emotional level, and then there's, all these, industry, whatever political things that go into whether or not this is happening. But that's emotionally, I think, where a big part of what's happening too,
This untimely death of Angus Cloud, who plays Fezco on the show, was so impactful because this show revolves around addiction, and he ultimately lost his own battle to addiction. And it's very clear in the 3rd season that his death influenced a lot of like the overtones of how season 3 concluded. This is obviously a scene from that they shot from the 1st season, I believe, but they included it in the 3rd season as sort of like a tribute to Angus. And it's so sad even to think about it now, because I do think there, like, specifically with this character that Angus played with Fezco, he had such a soft spot for everyone who was watching the show. Like, he was so integral to this show becoming such a comfort show for people, even though it deals with a lot of sexual and explicit content that's not always so beautiful. I feel like he, especially given that his character is like a literal drug dealer, but to see his character as a drug dealer still be portrayed as someone who is deserving of love, who cares for people, and he just brought such a life to this character, and we just grew to love him so much. His death still makes me sad to this day as well. I think it was probably really difficult for the cast to continue on with season 3, especially with how they chose to go about it. I think it's very clear that the cast kind of wants to leave Euphoria in the past at this point. I feel like if it was up to everyone, the show would have looked very different for season 3 if there was going to be a season 3. Notably, Zendaya is not an executive producer on the show for season 3. I think this is just such a pivotal thing that happened in real life that does essentially affect the show in so many different ways. Not just the fact that he physically can't be on the show anymore, but also just the fact that his death is so tied to such an important thematic element of the show when it comes to addiction. It just makes it really devastating. And then some other things that happened between season 2 and 3 is that Barbie Ferreira, Storm Reed, and Dominic Fike all depart from the show. They are not seen in the final season. And also Eric Dane is diagnosed with ALS. So we see him in, I believe, 2 episodes of season 3, but it's clear that the disease has continued to sort of progress physically in terms of like his ability to act. But it was great to see him in a couple of scenes in the 3rd season that he got to film before he ultimately passed away. And I am kind of curious, just on like a viewer perspective, what his character would have been doing in this 3rd season, especially given, like, I guess Jacob takes Nate Jacobs essentially takes on his father's like business. And I don't know, I just feel like Nate's storyline this season was actually just so fucking ridiculous. It was actually insane. Another thing that happened in between seasons 2 and 3 is also The Idol, and this was a show that Sam Levinson created that was released in between seasons 2 and 3 of Euphoria. It got extremely negative reviews. It was canceled after the 1st season, and I feel like this was the pivotal moment where we're like, yeah, Sam Levinson is a certified freakazoid. And I think we were already kind of at the point when season 2 came out being like, yeah, Sam Levinson is a freakazoid, but this just like confirmed it for everyone, being like, allegedly. There's like this reveal of his true character and intentions as a creative when looking at this show. And there are just like very obvious aspects of like humiliation, fetish, power domination type of vibe when it comes to what he's showing in his art. And I feel like all of those things can be showcased and displayed within art in like a tasteful way. He does not do that. I've only watched one episode of this show, if I'm gonna be honest, and I knew that I wasn't gonna enjoy it, so I didn't continue, and I've just always heard like really terrible things about it. This also made me look at The Weeknd a little sideways. Like, why would you do this type of project? And if you guys have watched his his film with Jenna Ortega for like his film that's like connected to his album Hurry Up Tomorrow, he's just like such a bad actor. Like I don't know why he tried. Like, great musician, great entertainer, but like, you need to step out. You need to bow out from being like an actor, because it's not looking good for you, King. It's, oh my god, like, he gives me the ick every time I see him on a big screen. Like, it's actually freaking insane. Okay, so before we really get into season 3 a little bit, I also want to talk about something that happened just before season 3, which is Labyrinth's departure. Now, we haven't really talked about him so far, but he was also incredibly integral to creating and building this world of Euphoria, because his music is so influential to how this show feels. His absence from season 3 was so heavy. I feel like there would still, the third season of Euphoria literally felt like a completely different show, and I feel like the absence of Labyrinth was like the biggest indicator of it. Hans Zimmer scores the third season of Euphoria without Labyrinth. They were supposed to collaborate, but then Labyrinth ended up bowing out. And obviously Hans Zimmer is an iconic, amazing scorer, but it just made it into a completely different show. And it felt empty. It genuinely felt empty not having Labyrinth's production and music on there. If you look at the third season, obviously it feels like a different show because they're not in high school anymore. That's like the main thing about the setting and the background of the show that feels different. But just the music alone, like not having Labyrinth on this season, felt so empty. Like, it was crazy. So he posted this Instagram story of his notes app, basically saying, "I'm done with this industry. Fuck Columbia," which is his record label. "Double fuck Euphoria. I'm out. Thank you and good night." And this was March 13th, 2026. Euphoria season 3 was set to debut on April 12th, and he posted this literally a month before Euphoria was supposed to drop. So I'm sure that the production team on Euphoria was crashing out because they literally had to take all of Labyrinth's music. I'm sure he like literally scored the whole thing, like it was ready to go, but then he was no longer part of the project. I'm very, very curious what the music would have sounded like if he was scoring it. I feel like it still would have felt like Euphoria, even though it was such a different like storyline and things like that. And I missed him. I really missed him on this show. Labyrinth also released a song during the release of the Euphoria episodes, and it's actually insane how you can kind of pinpoint, oh, this song definitely would have been like in this scene, and like it's so crazy how he's able to build this world just through sounds. I know that sounds really ridiculous, but his sound, his music just is Euphoria. I can't describe it any other way. It's so integral to how this show feels. So now we're gonna get into the final season and my thoughts on it. So I feel like this season, cinematically, I would actually say I liked a little bit more than season 2. I thought the colors and like the cinematography was really interesting. I feel like it was more interesting than season 2. But obviously the storyline was just like so incoherent. If you only watched season 2, you would not even know that like Nate or Jules were like part of the main cast. Like, Jules was literally like a side character. Like, we saw Rosalia more than Jules. And when I first watched the season premiere of the show, I was just kind of taken aback a lot by how different the show felt, especially the music not being by Labyrinth, and just the storylines overall obviously just didn't feel like anything that we were already watching in the past. I think there was like a certain level of cognitive dissonance I had to go through while watching this third season. Like, I kind of just had to come to terms with the fact that this was like a completely different show that I was watching. Like, I couldn't have the same expectations that I would have if this were Euphoria season 3 maybe 2 years after the second season. Like, there's just so much time has already passed. Like, it literally just felt like a completely different show. And I honestly would say that watching Euphoria season 3 was a fun watch. I think it was entertaining to a certain degree, but I don't think it was cohesive at all. I'm still unsure of like what exactly Sam Levinson was trying to say with this season. And I watched his podcast with the New York Times, I believe, where they were kind of just letting him explain like his creative process with the show and finishing it off. I think the overall themes of like online sex work, religion, marriage, and like the drug and crime scene, I think there was like a certain direction that Sam Levinson was trying to go, but I couldn't really pinpoint what he actually wanted us to take away from it. And I think that can be different for every viewer. It doesn't have to necessarily align just because Sam Levinson intended it to. Everything felt a little half-baked. I think the show itself felt entertaining. Like, I liked watching Rue go through this crazy bullshit all the time. And just seeing where like all the other characters ended up going, seeing Cassie just being absolutely batshit and Maddie playing along, Jules just stuck up in that penthouse all the time. I don't know, it was just a mess, but I was here for it. And we obviously have to talk about the main big thing that happened on the show, which is ultimately Rue dying. In my personal opinion, there was no other way for the show to end. Like, there's just no way that Rue could have made it out of the shit that she was getting herself into on season 3 alive. There was just no way. I thought to center the entire episode after Rue dies around Ollie was a great choice. I think Coleman Domingo is just like a phenomenal actor, and he did a phenomenal job with this character. But I just really can't figure out or like pinpoint what Sam Levinson wanted us to take away from the ending. I think it was interesting that he made the choice for Ollie to not like associate with the Islam religion anymore after Rue's death. Like that scene where he goes to AA and he's talking about how he himself relapsed, and then he goes and seeks revenge for Rue, which I thought was great, very satisfying. But also him going to the homestead and like reuniting with the family from the very beginning of the season. It felt full circle, but I think everyone had a bit of a different interpretation of like God bless us all being the very last line of Rue. I think Alamo, the actor who played Alamo, was phenomenal. I also think Bishop was great. I think they were great additions to the show. Angel, the actress who played Angel, phenomenal. Loved her. I really think that like the side characters that the new side characters that they added onto this season were a really nice touch. Other than like Alamo, I would say I don't think any of them like progressed or like impacted the storyline in a great amount, but I feel like they still added like a new fun touch to the show. And I'm not gonna lie, I wasn't like, yeah, Cassie was doing like a lot of crazy shit, but I also like wasn't really invested in like whatever she was doing. Just having Nate die and then Maddie like saving her, I felt so bad for Maddie because like I wish you could have really gotten your lick back, but at the end of the day you were just like saving this friend who like would never do the same for you. And it just made me feel sad. I don't know what they were even trying to do with Jules' character. Really confused with that. A lot of people were saying, like, this is conservative propaganda and all this other stuff. And I feel like I had a completely different interpretation to it because my own political ideologies may stray away from Sam Levinson's. But also, he was very adamant on this podcast that he is, like, not political. So I think that given his audience is looking at this show with a highly political lens, because he is talking about highly political topics, especially to a very politically polarizing generation and audience. So I think there lies the disconnect in how viewers are interpreting what the show is trying to say. I think the issue with Sam Levinson as a whole is that he seems very articulate and confident in like his intentions as an artist when explaining his thought process of creating his projects, but there seems to be like this discrepancy or this disconnect within the actual execution. Like, I feel like when I was listening to this podcast, it sounded like he was very intentional with everything that he did on this show, but the show was still extremely incohesive. It was extremely vapid. Everything felt so half-baked. It didn't make sense. I just feel like what he was saying in this podcast did not align with what he was doing with the final product of the show. And it was a little bit frustrating because he seems very like confident and declarative of what he was trying to do when that doesn't show on the actual series at all. I can't help but feel that maybe the cast members also agree, because it seems like they also have very conflicting thoughts about this season that they can't speak out on because obviously they're promoting the show. Yeah, I just think like Sam Levinson's biggest issue is like the lack of craftsmanship. The artistic intentions and the actual execution of the vision, there's just no alignment in that at all. And there was a comment on YouTube under this podcast where it says, he actually comes off as deep and wise, and it's hard to overstate how vapid and incoherent the show is. And that's what I mean. Like, I think this show, he seems to have a lot of ideas and intentions for it while not actually being able to execute the message. And I think his message is also extreme, like the fact that he's trying to distance the political aspects of these topics when displaying it on the show is also a huge disconnect. Art is inherently political, so if you choose not to address that, then like there's no cohesion in terms of like what we're supposed to take away from the show. There's also this one clip where he talks about the hyper online and how the hyper online takes everything so literally, and I think there is some merit to what he's saying, but I also think that just the conversation overall shows that he clearly didn't do a very, very good job in like showing the viewers why these so-called problematic elements are even put into the show to begin with. But I also do have a counter argument kind of contradicting that, so we can take a look at this clip real quick first.
The hyper online don't pick up humor or irony as much as like the average audience member, but at the same time they're kind of more advanced than a casual viewer in terms of like plot progression and certain details. They tend to take everything very literally. They're so kind of attuned to, you know, what's acceptable and not acceptable. I think it's like I think politics play a really big role. You've got characters who are, you know, Nazis and fentanyl dealers.
Right.
But what certain audience members get upset about is not the fentanyl that's killing people. It's the fact that they said the N-word. That seems very strange to me because one, they would say it, and two, they're doing way worse things than just saying the N-word.
Like I said, I do think there is some merit to what he's saying, but the fact that he acknowledges that the hyper online are extremely political, but he doesn't seem to consider that in the process of creating his art feels like a very intentional yet neglectful choice to me. And he talks about how the online kind of takes everything super literally when it comes to viewing and commenting on the show. And I actually want to talk about that a little bit more because I think Euphoria Sundays is also like such a big thing that impacted like the viewing experience as well. I think Euphoria was definitely one of those like water cooler shows of the Gen Z audience. Like live tweeting and things like that was a very interactive part of the watching experience. I didn't watch Euphoria season 1 in real time as it was coming out, so I don't recall that time period. But season 2 I felt like was so fun watching it with everyone on Twitter. And specifically, this was also before Elon destroyed Twitter. And Angus Cloud was also like live tweeting all the time. And I feel like him not also like engaging with the audience. Like we definitely felt his absence as well. Given that it's been almost 4 years since the last season, I think a lot has progressed since then, obviously, with the political and economic state of the world, but also when it comes to media literacy. I think around this time, the rise of curated algorithms and short form content, while it was already becoming really prominent during the second season, it just exponentially became more of the mainstream, at least with my generation and younger. So I feel like this kind of played a role in terms of like how the social media commentary almost felt a little bit more brain dead for this third season. I don't know, like I feel like it's a number of things. I think one, the media literacy crisis is like actually a real thing. I think people can't like read between the lines with things anymore, with media anymore. They can't like recognize undertones or like overtones. They can't recognize like certain themes and elements without it being directly stated at them, because I feel like short form media, that's the whole point. Like they have to just get to the point immediately, quick. Like there were just so many, it just genuinely felt like people were being really stupid when watching the show. I was like, are you guys actually watching the show? Like I'm very, very confused. The reason why I mentioned that this is before with season 3, now we're live tweeting on X. Elon's Twitter is like a completely new environment, it feels like, than what the Twitter ecosystem used to be, given that a lot of people are financially incentivized to tweet certain things as well. It just felt brain dead. Like I don't know how else to describe it. I honestly think like some of the social media commentary that was happening during the third season of Euphoria almost like ruined the watching experience for me, and that makes me really sad to say, because I thought that was like one of the most interactive and fun parts of watching the show before this. Like I said, it's just the perfect case study to look at how media literacy rates are like starting to decline, because the way people could not keep up with storylines or like read between the lines for certain things, for pretty obvious things. Like people were asking like when Alamo went to go save Cassie, oh, did Maddie have to fuck Alamo for him to save Cassie? Like no fucking shit. Like they very obviously alluded to that. They very obviously alluded to the fact that Maddie had to basically give up her body so that she could save Cassie and Nate. But there were just other moments where I was just like, oh my god, you guys are like literally just not watching the show. I don't understand how you are confused about certain things. Like when Rue finds like Angel's ID in like those Nazi drug dealers like safe or whatever, people were like, oh my god, why do they have Angel's ID? And it's like, are we watching the same show about like how these girls are being like trafficked and shit? Like it was like really frustrating going on social media and just seeing how like people are like just don't know how to watch a show anymore. And I think short form media has something to do with it. Like I do think we're so accustomed to short form being so quick, so fast, and just saying everything verbatim, and we're supposed to take everything literally right then and there. Like people just aren't able to recognize subtext or like unspoken undertones in shows anymore, and it was frustrating. I feel like people had a lot of different interpretations of like how Rue's death happened. They were like, oh my god, she was murdered, oh my god, she overdosed, oh my god, she relapsed, like all of those things. I think it's important to ask those questions, like was she this, was she that? But I think the real answer is it's kind of all of them at the same time. Like, and I think that conversation felt a little bit more like productive to the interpretation of the show. I think people were obviously taking the show very like literally towards the end, being like, why all of a sudden is like Rue a Christian? But it's like you can see those religious elements throughout the show, starting from like season 1. Like if you aren't familiar, like the journey to recovery and like the 12 steps and AA, that all has very much religious and spiritual elements to it too. Like there's a scene in the first season where she's going to NA, when Rue is going to NA, and she has to look at herself in the mirror in a casket. And then there's that a song, I'm Trying, in the second season, where she like goes into the church and she's like hugging Labyrinth. And then we obviously see like a lot of obvious religious elements to season 3, where she sees this burning tree. Also the special episode with Rue and Ali, like all they're talking about is God. Throughout pretty much that entire episode, they're talking about politics, they're talking about religion. It's a very significant theme throughout the show that I feel like people were kind of just like, oh my god, this came out of nowhere. But it's like, again, have you been watching the show? Like, I feel like not only are people forgetting to look at the undertones and read between the lines, but they're also just like forgetting things that already happened in the show. And I guess to close it all off, I know this episode was kind of all over the place. I didn't really have direction when it came to researching for this episode. I didn't know if I necessarily wanted to just focus on season 3, because not only is the progression of all these characters' storylines in the show something to look at, but also like what it really took to get there in real life, whether it's the dynamics between the cast, whether it's the dynamics with Sam Levinson, whether it's the aesthetics that have started to evolve or devolve throughout the show. And I've been saying this on TikTok for a while, actually. I want a documentary about Euphoria. I think this show was a shit show, to say the least. I'm sure there are people who worked on this show that have a lot of fucking crazy stories. A lot of cast members who have no longer been part of the show anymore, such as Barbie Ferreira. Even Alexa Demi has spoken out about like their struggles outside of the show that has also like kind of manifested throughout this entire journey. Even the way like Zendaya and Jacob Elordi talk about the show now, it sounds like they definitely had like some fundamental disagreements with like how this show was going in terms of their characters. Jacob Elordi, at least, it just seems like he wanted to get the fuck out of there. He was just ready to cash in the check, and that's it. I think it's very clear that given that it seems that everyone in the cast does not seem to be in alignment with how the series progressed and ended, but can't seem to voice their actual opinion on it during like the promotional run, obviously, I think it would be fun and like interesting for me to watch them look back on it like years later in a documentary format to share their perspective on their experience working on the show. I think that would be great. I think a lot of people would tune in for that. Even if I'm like 40 years old when it happens, like I want to see it. And I also think, just overall, my final thoughts on Euphoria, I think it's important to point out that this show started with like this shaky foundation of creative dishonesty, beginning with Petra Collins and her art direction essentially being plagiarized and stolen, allegedly, which kind of contributed to the shakiness and the instability when it comes to the cohesiveness of the show itself. You see the cohesiveness of the first season and you start to see it diminish and deteriorate throughout the seasons. And it makes sense why, because the person who created like the crux of the aesthetics of the show is not there anymore, and it was essentially just kind of copied in a lot of ways. And I think there's an irony when it comes to Sam Levinson's history and his inconsistency of what he actually wants, like what kind of story he actually wants to tell. It's obviously not exclusive to season 3 either, but also just like taking the context from like a teen drama to like a Western drama theme. And I would be okay with never seeing another Sam Levinson project again. Because if it's gonna end up like this every time, not a fan. Thinking about the potential of where this show really could have gone makes me sad and disappointed. But I don't want to say that things happen for a reason, but I do think just seeing where a lot of the actors ended up in their careers, I think that this show definitely created something special for people. And I think there's a reason why people still resonated with it, especially like Zendaya and her performance as Rue. Like, truly Rue was what kept us watching. Like, we still cared about Rue to stay tuned and see what happens to her. Zendaya's performance as Rue could not be overstated. Like, she is so incredibly talented. I do think this is going to be one of those characters and performances that is going to be looked at as her best for a very long time. I'm a little sad that I can't end this on a good note because I do really love this show. I like, as a viewer, I feel just really sad with how this show ended up. And I think I just have to leave on an unsatisfying note, just like this show did. But I hope you guys liked this episode. Let me know your thoughts. Do you share some of the same thoughts and feelings? Let me know. And I will see you guys in the next episode. Bye.